Amaka Ailo had scrubbed the marble floors of the Adeyemi mansion for 11 years, and in all that time, no one in that house had ever once asked her how she was doing. She woke every morning at 4:30 a.m. in the small servants' quarters behind the main house, a single room with a narrow bed, a plastic chair, and a window that looked out onto the generator shed. By 5 o'clock, she was in the kitchen, grinding pepper, boiling water, laying out Madame Adi's morning tea exactly the way the old woman liked it, 2 sugars, a splash of goat milk, no more, no less. For 11 years, Amaka had folded shirts, ironed agbadas, wiped down chandeliers she would never be allowed to sit beneath, and swallowed insults from a family who looked at her the way one looks at furniture, useful, expected, invisible. Amaka. The soup is too salty again, Chief Adeyemi's son, Tebena, would bark even when the soup was perfect. He liked to remind her of her place. He liked it especially in front of guests. Yes sir. Sorry sir, Amaka would say, eyes down, voice flat. She had learned long ago that arguing only made the days longer. But Madame Adi's was different. The old woman was the matriarch of the family, Chief Adeyemi's widow, 78 years old, sharp-eyed despite her failing hips, and the only person in that house who ever called Amaka by her full name instead of just barking a girl or snapping fingers. Amaka, she would say some evenings, patting the seat beside her bed, sit. Tell me about your daughter. Because Amaka had a daughter, Ifeoma, 9 years old, living 2 hours away with Amaka's sister in Ikorodu, because a living mate's quarters was no place to raise a child, and because Amaka's wages, small as they were the only thing standing between Ifeoma and a life of real hunger. Madame Adiz knew all of this. She asked about Ifeoma's schoolwork. She asked if Amaka was eating enough. Once, when Amaka came down with malaria and could barely stand, it was Madame Adiz, not her own children, who called the doctor and sat with her until the fever broke. You are the only one in this house who remembers I am also a person, Amaka told her once, half joking, half not. Madame Adiz had only smiled, a tired, knowing smile. They will remember, one day. Everybody remembers, eventually. Sometimes too late. Nobody understood what she meant until the will was read. Madame Adiz died on a quiet Tuesday in the rainy season, in her sleep, the way she always said she hoped to go. The house fell into the performance of mourning, black lace, loud wailing from relatives who had not visited in years, a funeral catered lavishly enough to bankrupt a smaller family. Amaka mourned too, quietly, in the kitchen, where no one noticed or cared. She had lost the only person who had ever treated her like she mattered. 2 weeks later, the family gathered in the drawing room for the reading of the will. Lawyers in stiff suits. Tebena in an agboda far too expensive for a man who hadn't held a steady job in 6 years. His sister, Amaka, dabbing dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, already discussing renovation plans for when the estate settles. Amaka was in the kitchen, as usual, preparing refreshments nobody would thank her for. That was when the lawyer, a thin man named Barrister Effiong, cleared his throat and asked, in front of the entire assembled family, "Is there a woman here named Amaka Ailo?" The room went silent. Tebena laughed first, a short, disbelieving back. "The house girl. Why would you call her here?" But the lawyer did not laugh. Madame Adeyemi's instructions were explicit. She is to be present for the reading. They brought Amaka in from the kitchen, still in her uniform, hands down from the sink, utterly confused. She stood near the door, unsure if she was even allowed to sit, until the lawyer gestured her toward a chair, the same chairs the family sat in, something that had never once happened in 11 years. Barrister Effiong opened the folder. "To my children, Tebena and Amaka Adeyemi, I leave the sum of 20 million naira each, along with my jewelry and personal effects, to be divided between them as they see fit." Tebena's shoulders relaxed. Amaka smiled faintly. "The remainder of my estate," the lawyer continued, "including the mansion at 14 Bodeland Close, all associated properties, my shares in Adeyemi Holdings, and the entirety of my liquid assets, approximately 1.4 billion naira, I leave to Amaka Ilo, in recognition of 11 years of loyalty, care, and humanity that my own blood too often failed to show me. For a moment, nobody in the room breathed. Then Tebena was on his feet, his voice cracking through the silence like a whip. This is a joke. She manipulated my mother. She's been poisoning her mind for years, waiting for this exact moment. Mr. Adeyemi, the lawyer said calmly, your mother recorded a video statement anticipating this exact reaction. Shall I play it? He didn't wait for an answer. On the screen, Madam Adiz appeared, sitting up in her bed, weeks before her death, her voice steady despite her frailty. If you are watching this, my children are angry, and Amaka is confused. Let me explain myself, because I owe her that much, and I owe you the truth. For 11 years I watched this woman raise a child alone on wages that would embarrass a beggar, while my own children spent more on shoes in one afternoon than she earned in a month. I watched her bring me tea with a smile even on days I know she had not eaten. I watched her sit with me through nights when my own children could not be bothered to visit, too busy, too important, too tired. My children, I love you. But love does not mean blindness. You inherited my name, my face, and my money your whole lives, and it made you cruel. Amaka inherited nothing, and it made her kind. I am simply making sure that kindness does not go unrewarded, and cruelty does not go unanswered. This house has enough room for everyone if everyone is willing to be decent. Amaka, if you are watching this, thank you for seeing me as a person when the world only saw a wealthy old woman waiting to die. The house is yours now. Do something good with it. The screen went dark. The room erupted. Tebena shouted that he would contest it in court, that no judge in Lagos would allow a maid to walk away with the family fortune. Amaka wept, not for her mother, Amaka realized with a quiet ache, but for the mansion she had already mentally redecorated. Amaka said nothing. She simply sat there, hands folded in her lap, the same hands that had scrubbed these floors for over a decade, now shaking, not with triumph, but with something closer to grief. She had not wanted the house. She had wanted, more than anything, one more evening sitting beside Madam Adiz's bed, talking about Ifeoma schoolwork. The court case dragged on for 4 months. Tebena hired the sharpest lawyers his mother's own money, the 20 million she'd left him, could buy. He produced witnesses claiming Amaka had isolated Madam Adiz from her family, had whispered manipulations, had schemed from the very first year of her employment. But Madam Adiz had been thorough. Bank records showed Amaka's wages had never changed beyond small annual increases, hardly the payoff of a master manipulator. Hospital records showed it was Amaka who called ambulances, administered medication, tracked doctors' appointments, while Tebena and Amaka's names appeared nowhere in years of medical paperwork. Staff testimonies, the gardener, the security guard, the cook, all confirmed the same pattern: Amaka present, family absent. The judge did not take long to rule. This court finds no evidence of undue influence, she said, only evidence of a mother who was, apparently, more perceptive than her children gave her credit for. The will stood. Amaka Ilo moved into the mansion on Bodyland Close on a Sunday morning, carrying only 2 suitcases and holding her daughter's hand. Ifeoma, now 10, stood in the marble foyer she had only ever seen from outside the gates, mouth open, eyes wide. Mama, is this really ours? Amaka looked around, at the chandelier she had dusted 1,000 times without ever being allowed to look up at it too long, at the grand staircase she had polished on her knees, at the kitchen where she had spent more waking hours than her own bedroom. It's ours, she said quietly. But it's not going to stay just ours. 6 months later, the east wing of the mansion had been converted into something new, a transitional shelter for domestic workers between jobs, women fleeing abusive employers, mothers like she had once been, sending money home to children they rarely got to hug. She called it Adi's house. There were free meals in the kitchen where Amaka once cooked alone. There were beds in rooms that once sat empty, reserved for guests who never came. There was a small library, stocked with school books, because Amaka remembered too well what it felt like to worry about a daughter's education from 2 hours away. Tobena and Kayameka never returned to the property. They took their 20 million each and built lives Amaka no longer thought about, not out of bitterness, but because she simply didn't have the time. There was too much to do. Sometimes, in the evenings, Amaka would sit on the same veranda where Madam Adis used to take her tea, Ifioma doing homework at the table beside her, the sound of other women's laughter drifting up from the kitchen below, women she had given a place to stay, a job, a future. She would look up at the chandelier, the one she used to dust from a stepladder, now glowing warm and gold above a house that finally belonged to someone who knew what it meant to have nothing. "Thank you," she would whisper, not to the house, but to the woman who had seen her, really seen her, when no one else would.